Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Tarek Odali from Business Review, and I will be your host. It is our pleasure to have Veeva Systems with us today, who'll be presenting this webinar. It's titled Transform Change Management with a Modern QMS. Now, today's guest speakers. Allow me to introduce Robert Gertner, Veeva Director, Strategy Vault Quality, Europe, and Tima Stojastak, Veeva Senior Solution Consultant. You're going to hear from them very, very soon. But first, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar platform. Now, this is On24. You'll find it's fully browser-based. If you do disconnect for any reason, please click on the link that you received via email to immediately rejoin the session. In order to ask questions today, you can send them in at any time via the questions widget. So type the question into the box there at the top left-hand corner of the screen, then click submit. We plan to allocate some time at the end of today's session to address any questions or thoughts you may have. Please use the yellow help widget at the bottom of your screen if you require any technical assistance, and you can also move, resize, and maximize any of the windows in front of you to get a better view of the slides if you need it. But now, housekeeping out of the way, so please allow me to welcome today's first speaker. Robert, over to you.
Thank you, Tarek. So this webinar today will focus on the following questions. So first of all, why is change management challenging? Second, why are existing solutions not resolving a long-known issue? And finally, how can Veeva Solution Vault Quality help to fix that? Let's go straight to the topic and talk about what's the issue about change management. So, as we all know, the life science industry is on a journey, and life has become much more complex over time with more regulations and more markets, and with a more diverse portfolio. So if you need a proof for that, you just need to have a look on the number of changes quality units are dealing with every year. In a top pharma company, that can easily relate to over 200 changes for a single product. And considering the much more diverse portfolios, that could end up in 40,000 change requests per year with an implementation rate that is even below 50%. And finally, workload increase paired with limited human resources typically leads to long lead times and even a backlog of requests that cannot be processed anymore. And as a result, it may take months and not even years from initial assessment to final implementation of a change. And that cannot be in the interest of pharma companies, considering that changes are performed to drive continuous improvement and innovation in the market, right? So let's take a closer look at post-approval changes. And as ICH Q10 already stated, they are most critical as changes after marketing approval have to be much more formalized than before initial submission. And there's a lot of coordination to be done between quality on the one side and regulatory colleagues, but also a lot of good reasons to perform that kind of changes, right? So post-approval changes may be related to extending market access and supply of life-saving medicines to patients, continuous optimization of a manufacturing process, reacting to quality issues that have occurred, or reacting to new regulatory needs in the market. That all makes sense, but post-approval changes on a global level are very complicated, and that is the reason why it takes up to years to implement. And in a survey from 2017, almost 100% of the participants confirmed that the current post-approval change process is hindering technology progress. And that may not be so surprising looking at how long changes nowadays take, but of course this is a critical bottleneck for innovation for the benefit of patients. A major root cause of this situation is the lack of harmonization on the regulatory side and the disconnect of the product lifecycle from a marketing approval perspective versus commercial manufacturing according to GMP. A more global set of requirements for the CMC part would certainly help here. Hence, like organizations like the ICH have started to draft like Q12 that builds on top of the Q10 guidance with a specific focus now on harmonized change approaches across the product lifecycle. But if we are honest, so regulatory complexity is one root cause, for the issue in change management, but it may only be one half of the story, right? So independent from regulatory needs, there seems to be a lot of potential to streamline the internal change process and optimize it before a change/variation gets exposed to regulatory bodies. So for that reason, let's try to understand what's going wrong internally. And the same survey came to the conclusion that only 38% of the participants agree that change control internally is even effective. And that is a very low number, as typically quality processes are considered to be overall effective and stable, with more on focusing to make them efficient. Efficiency in that context would mean that based on a stable process outcome, you would rather look at productivity, optimized costs, or lead times here. But the survey participants pointed out a couple of major issues. The first one is, of course, about the lack of speed, but also that lead times are not very predictable anymore if you have a very slow and cumbersome process. It is also about the inability to close changes without new actions due to unintended outcomes. And finally, about the concern that not all global and local regulatory requirements were considered accordingly. At the end of the day, that means that there's a high risk that you have to put additional effort into fixing a problem that is self-inflicted by your own change. So it's like not closing the loop, so you still have like activities, and it's very unintended, and it could be more from a, let's say, GXP perspective, but also like the regulatory concerns you have that it's not meeting the requirements. So there's no question that effective and efficient change management is critical, and the issues have been known for a very long time already. So why hasn't it been fixed by systems or solutions or by process already in place? Actually, it is not easy to change quality systems that have been built out over decades, and that also applies, of course, for the change management part. And let's start to look into the system landscape, as technology is the key factor for either preventing innovation or driving innovation of a process. And historically, quality systems, including the change control, were implemented as point solutions with a quite functional and site focus. This approach was based on the initial business needs that were decades ago, but also on the technologies available at that time. But these siloed systems led also to broken processes, and that's specifically for post-approval changes. We have also the regulatory variations to manage with other systems, and that all got very complex at the end of the day. And finally, there has been the notion to build a system for more the internal use, where pharma companies nowadays have a significant portion of the GXP critical operation covered by external partners. And you know that about the key trend here, that the increased partnership, for example, with CMOs, and that both sides would need to look proactively into like the changes. The typical reactive approach of sharing like change requests or change request information has turned to be risky, because it could be like your CMO has like a different path than yourself, and that has been risky from both a GMP perspective, but also from a regulatory side. So current solutions are not meeting the business needs, and specifically in the core process areas of a change management that are like the impact assessment step, the change execution, and also the final decision making. And there are a lot of common patterns across these steps in terms of issues, and they all come back to the same things like manual effort for collecting relevant data, and with that recurring collection, also the risk that you have like incomplete information and you forget to collect all the required data, and no structured way to benefit from your historical knowledge, how you did manage the changes before. That is somehow buried somewhere, but it's not like obvious that you can use that data and say, well, you're going to apply that for future changes as well. And very practically, to have the visibility into a process status, if you have like a global post-approval change that goes across quality, like other functions, but also regulatory, it's very difficult to know where that process stands and how long it will take. So I'm pretty sure that there have been a lot of attempts to improve this process before, but there are clear limitations in doing so without being more disruptive in changing the ways of working internally. And one of the issues seems to be about our passion to record key information in a paper-centric way. I'm referring to documents as being like real paper still, or electronic copies like being paper under glass, but still being unstructured content. The main challenge with documents is that it's quite difficult to get like the later access to that relevant data, and even in real time. Yeah? And also the inability to derive like conclusions from what data you have collected. Again, for change management, this is surprising, as this is, as we pointed out before, a very formalized process where we record a lot of data points throughout that process. But the disconnect, and that was also clear from the survey, is that it's still a very hybrid data collection consisting of already real data to be collected, but a lot of entries into documents without a clear rationale where to apply what principle, where to put what data points in a system that handles data or into like a form or checklist. And that may also be dependent on the capabilities of the systems you have in hand at the moment, right? So finally, as a conclusion, only 17% of the industry would claim that they have a full data-driven change process, whereas 83% of the companies are suffering from that disadvantage of having a hybrid collection and still putting like critical information in documents as well. So the overall issue with like why are the known solutions and proposals not fixing the issue are mainly about the program process between like different functions that quality started to have a change control, what was quite functional versus cross-functional, what is nowadays needed, especially in the world of post-approval changes, but also about the poor usage of the collected data and the limitations you have if you don't have the right systems to analyze those. So how could a different approach help to transform change management? And we called it a transformation from the beginning rather than just improvement, as we identified 3 fundamental key elements that need to be rethought completely. And the first one is about getting from the siloed and broken processes where we're talking about to really cross-functional and global collaboration, to come from document handling to data handling. And later on, of course, with the data to come from data to intelligence. Let's start with product lifecycle management and the end-to-end process for change and variation management. The solution is straightforward, yet to be implemented. The process may start, a change process may start on the GMP side with a change request, and as part of that impact assessment, the question will have to be clarified whether there's a regulatory impact, yes or no. And of course, like what kind of variation type that would be. And sometimes this is straightforward and sometimes it is not. But in any case, it would be quite helpful also that the system helps you to benefit from the previous knowledge you gained by analyzing the previous decision you have been taken, right? So, and later on, part of the process will be to determine which countries are impacted and synchronize the overall implementation plan with country-specific approvals. In the current world, that sounds very complicated, and everybody who is familiar with the topic knows it is really complicated. So instead of having different silos for quality and regulatory, all content, data, and process should reside rather in one unified platform that allows then for real-time insights into the whole picture, from both sides, from the regulatory and the quality side, or from any other stakeholder that is involved in the overall process. And that's what we want to demonstrate here in that flow. So that's straightforward. So it should not be like two separate siloed systems and process, but it should be an end-to-end process. And for that, you need one platform. And Veeva is providing such kind of platform with specific applications for quality and regulatory. Those teams would still need a specific environment. They have special requirements. They have own ways how to process things. But of course, with the ability to connect the dots and have a seamless process flow and information exchange to really address that need to have an end-to-end post-approval change process. And additionally, and that is valid now for our solution, being a cloud-based platform, it should be allowed to have that possibility to have external collaboration, because that could also involve CMOs. It could be involving suppliers or any other party that is external. And that should be done in a very easy way, but yet secure, of course. The concept to have one platform, but is still having best of breed applications on that platform that work together. This is groundbreaking in many ways. But in terms of change management, you can imagine how regulatory variations could be seamlessly handed over now to commercial manufacturing or vice versa. And if we come back to the initial challenges and the survey results, it was all about speed, effectiveness, efficiency, and risk. And you hopefully get how this concept would, of course, mitigate all of that now. So we talked about three elements. So one is the process. The next very important transforming element would be to unify content and data in a single source. As we learned before, our quality processes are still very much document-centric, as documents have been a very convenient standard for GxP-compliant recording. But it was more about the focus on having evidence to record it and just to archive it, but not using the data as such. But in today's reality, it's all about data and the insights we can gain from it. And unification can mean to have a better linkage and integrity between the documents world that we will still have in Pharma and the data world. But it could also mean to transform documents into data whenever it makes sense. And it makes sense when the nature of the content is rather structured without the need of a lot of narratives. And a good example here would be specifications. So we are used to have specifications still as documents, but maybe that doesn't make sense. Let's take this example. A specification is typically maybe born in pharmaceutical development. It becomes part of a submission, and after marketing approval, it is utilized for commercial manufacturing. Usually this is a document-centric artifact, but for real executions, someone would transfer the data points of a specification to downstream systems manually. That could be, for example, LIMS or an MES, and then even enrich them, as the initial specification may not be practical enough for routine manufacturing. So that could happen on a specific site or with external partners. And obviously, this is an inefficient and risky process. And the risk is that the approved marketing status and the downstream usage may start to deviate. And you have to put a lot of effort in monitoring, auditing, and just keeping that together. And the complexity, of course, comes from the volumes. Because in reality, we're not talking about one specification that is going to be put in the commercial manufacturing reality. It is a combination that would come out with hundreds of different specifications for different markets and different manufacturings for the same product. So this is multiplied by X, and it makes it really quite difficult to keep the integrity of all this information for a single specification you had before. Actually, it should be the other way around. And structured data should also be captured in a very structured way. And the specification is structured data. There will still be the need for representing information as an easy-to-read offline format, for example, for submissions, for inspection purposes. But this formatted output can be generated by the system whenever needed. And the change in mindset is, of course, that the data remains to be the master, and the generated document is just a representation for a specific purpose. Yeah? But if you change it around and say you have the data as master, so that, of course, would resolve a lot of issues. And coming back to our change management use case, with the ability to decompose unstructured content into specific data points, we can also assess and track changes on a much more granular level now. We could build in intelligence into formerly flat checklists and enable a more dynamic guidance on both technical and regulatory decisions. A practical example based on specifications would be a change of a limit for established acceptance criteria, and that may be more critical than changing an internal SOP reference in the specification. Now, a guided process can help you to be much more specific with impact assessment, but also giving you the capability to automatically report how often and where you have changed limits or detect where an SOP reference needs to be updated. That could be, at the moment, a quite manual process, right? So a smart checklist for impact assessment that leverages like regulatory guidances, best practices, but also previous assessments can guide the change owner and dynamically define criticality, variation types, identify stakeholders to be notified and also due dates for that, and propose actions to be taken, right? Such kind of smart checklist should be fully integrated into your overall quality system for managing changes or other kinds of quality processes. Today, we're focusing on change management, but of course, there's a lot of value in having the ability to see the connections of the change to other related quality issues, for example, or the target of change. You should always be able to see and navigate to all changes from the target of change, that could be products, organizations, equipments, documents, etc., and see the relationship. And you will always be able to generate the change protocol over time and report and analyze based on that. And that is something we're going to show in a short live demo in a couple of minutes too. So the value of a fully integrated quality system is that you can gain real-time insights to what is happening with your change. This is valid for the overall change process, but also, as we now introduced a smart checklist on a very granular level, you can also drill down to impact assessment responses across multiple changes and analyze those for future decision-making. With that background information, I hand over to my colleague Timo, who has prepared a concrete change example for live demonstration.
Okay, so the scenario that I want to demonstrate today is the one where I've been asked to perform a risk and an impact analysis on the change control. So what I will be doing is I will perform an impact and risk assessment, and then I'll run the system-guided checklist, including the assessment of regulatory impact, and then I will also visualize the change control data and show you how Vault can bring all of that together. So I've received an automatic notification from Vault via email. I could have followed that link, but instead I've just logged into Vault here, and on the home page I am presented with my current pending tasks over here. So as you can see here, this is the task that we're dealing with today, the impact and risk assessment of a change control, or as we call this in Vault, a quality event. So if I open this up, this is presenting me with the dynamic electronic form of the change control. So let's take a look at some of the details that are already captured on this change. So as you can see, this change is about a new manufacturer for our product, Vodafone Salt. The different sections here on the right-hand side, they see that there is already a product associated, that there's 2 change actions associated, and 1 document change action. Right? So let's have a look at the related products. I expect this is going to be Vodafone, yeah, that is correct. So that looks good. Let's have a look at the impact and risk analysis section over here. Now this is still empty and it's waiting for my input. So there are some actions defined already. And as you can see, they're divided into 2 different sections, the change actions and the document change actions. Now, the change actions are the actions that need to be executed on, need to be implemented, and the document change actions are those actions that link to documents that either need to be updated or documents that need to be created as part of this change control. And Vault is connecting all of that together automatically. So linking documents and data together in this way is really powerful. There's automatic updating taking place to ensure that the change automatically waits for the completion of the documents and that nothing can be implemented without the actions completed first. Okay, so in order to help me determine the impact and the risk of this change, I'm going to use a guided checklist, which I can run directly from the menu over here. This checklist is configured by myself, so this is customer or organization specific, and it's also taking into account the context of this change. And it can change depending on the change control data. So for example, if I would just change this change control into an IT change, for example, the checklist that's presented to me will change into an IT impact assessment checklist. Okay, so let's change that back now to manufacturing so that we can actually run the manufacturing checklist. Okay, so I'm going to run this checklist, and Vault is presenting me now with a message that my checklist is being created, and it's made available here in the checklist section. So I'm going to run this checklist now, and as soon as I open this up, it's presented to me as a survey with sections here on the left-hand side, instructions and questions guiding me through the process. So this is my personalized checklist. And this is set up for customers specifically so that this is in line with your policies and your organizational processes. Right? So first thing that we need to enter here is the proposed implementation date. So let's set that to November. Yep. And now let's dive into the product impact. There's a number of questions here ranging from 1 to 6, and they're of different types. So we can have multiple choice questions, dates, and text entries, and drop-downs, etc. So let's just start here at the beginning. Does the change impact the manufacturing procedures? Well, obviously it is. Does it have impact on product quality? Let's set that to be further investigated. Okay. Does the change have impact on registered products? On finished products? Yes. Does the change have impact on registered products? Well, that's actually a good question. So let's check on that. Let's leave the window open for now, and we'll just continue with, does the change have impact on potential adverse events? We don't think so, and this is minor impact on artwork. Okay, so I'll close that survey off, and I'm actually going to go back into my change control to see if there's any regulatory impact. Okay, so in our change control, we can look at the actions that are here, and maybe there is already an action to update regulatory filings. And indeed, there is a change action here to file a CMC variation for that Vodafone Salt. And if I open that action up, I can see this is currently already assigned to our regulatory associate, Stein Willems. So that is all set up and it's looking good. And I can also see there is a link here to our regulatory event. So if I open that particular regulatory event up, it's going to go into Vault RIM, which is our regulatory management environment that's covering end-to-end regulatory processes, both on the document side as well as on the data side. So a lot of the data is already entered in here. I think the impacted substance looks good to me. That's Vodafone Salt, correct. And because Vault RIM manages all my registrations and my submissions, I'm able to conduct an automatic impact assessment on this event directly here. And that will then show me all the possible impacted markets and impacted registrations. So in order to do that, I'll go in here and ask for an impact assessment report. And I want to see this obviously by manufacturer. Click next. and that will open up the report and show me all of the affected markets and registrations. So that's actually quite a lot. There's US, there's Canada, France, Denmark, Belgium, Malaysia, and it's all approved registrations that are affected. So for me, that's all of the information I need here. Let's close out Bold Rim, and let's get back to our checklist. So going back to the change, going back to our checklist, where we can actually finish that. If we started that earlier on, we can actually finish that off right now. And now we can say, yes, it has impact on existing registrations. And it will then ask me, okay, then specify the impacted markets. Well, we'll just put this to US, Germany, France, Malaysia, Canada, and Belgium. Don't forget Belgium. So we'll finish that checklist now off and go back to a quality event so that we now have the information that we needed to have, and that's closing out that checklist functionality. Now, with that, I now have enough information to actually complete and close out my task, which was to perform that impact and risk assessment. So I'm able to complete that task here, and Volt is now asking me to fill out at least the required information for the completion of the impact and risk assessment. So I'm now able to assess that impact as medium impact, and I will put some information here for the impact analysis and risk analysis. So let's type our impact analysis. Let's type our risk analysis and complete our task. Okay, so that was a quick overview of how an impact and risk assessment can be done in a modern quality management system. That's also an example of how this can work on a single change control. But we can also join all of the data from different changes into reports and dashboards for more insight and analysis. So let me show you a dashboard on that I've put together, which gives me all of the information around the status of current change controls, and also provides me with information that comes directly from the checklist data. So as an example, I see all of the changes that are due by quarter, and I can group that into different quarters. I can group that by months and years, etc. I'm looking at all of the changes that are currently past their due date, or the different impacted areas. So how many changes are affecting commercial area, manufacturing area, and so forth. And then further down here, I'm actually able to pull that checklist data, to pull that assessment data here into reports and dashboards, where I can now see how many changes are actually impacting products. So how many times did someone reply no or reply yes to that question around, is the change impacting the product, yes or no? Or even the question here on how far it's impacting product quality. Is there a major impact? Is it minor impact? Or is it to be further investigated? So that structured approach to assess impact and risk can help you, first of all, to understand the risk on the change, but it can also help to bring information together from multiple sources so that organizations can have a higher level overview and understanding of where the current activities on the change control are, and more importantly, where the risk of the changes are. So thank you for that, and with that, I'll hand it back over to Robert. Thank you.
Thank you, Timo. We're coming to the end of the webinar, and before we are moving over to the Q&A session, let me summarize what you should focus on when transforming change management. First of all, it's about overcoming the siloed approach of the past and connect all parties internally and externally. And for post-approval changes, this is mainly about the quality and the regulatory team. Another key aspect of end-to-end processes is to connect all relevant elements of the change, and besides the streamlined process between cross-functional teams, this is about document and data from a single source. And the change, as we learned, is very often still based on document-centric information. Transition from documents to data will allow for more structured and predictable change management. And finally, for more structured data capturing and analysis, this will open new opportunities for quicker and fact-based decision-making. So with that, I hand over back to Tarek to see if we have any questions.
Thank you very much. Just a reminder for the audience, we are about to start our Q&A session now, so please, if you'd like to ask a question, you can do that by typing your question into the box at the top left-hand corner of the screen. Don't forget to click Submit to submit your question. And yes, we've received a few so far already, so let's start with one of these. Somebody here says, how do you work with external partners in Veeva Vault Quality? When would they be informed on a planned change and vice versa? Who wants to take this one?
So, Timo, if you're okay, I'm going to check that one. So I would say there's no limitation from a system perspective how closely you would collaborate with external partners. This is more like a matter of your own maturity, so what you want to disclose at which time. So what we have seen, so if companies are starting to work with our systems and starting to expose information to externals, that it might be quite conservative. But at least if we come to the quality process, it could be like the change process, or it could be other quality events like deviations, that at least it would be a great value to have like a connection or like this interaction when we come to actions. Yeah? So that means we talked about deviations, about kappas, we talk about audits, about really having a collaboration in the system about audit findings. But in changes, it means right to really use the system to assign change actions to external parties. If you're higher on the maturity level and you have started there, of course, like there's big value if both sides would expose their change planning much more earlier. Yeah? Just also to give like people a heads up and better prepare and be part of the assessment. Yeah? Give their knowledge as well, but also to be able to have a better planning and be more predictable how these actions they get later on will be completed as well. So that would be like, it's not a straightforward answer, but I hope that answered the question in the sense that it's not a system question, so the system would be able to do a very deep collaboration with externals, of course.
Thank you very much, Robert. I'm sure that does answer the question, but I'll move on now to another one here. This person says, you presented a checklist as part of the impact assessment step. Is the electronic checklist dynamic in the sense that the responses trigger the next steps of the change process? Who wants to talk about this one?
Yeah, I'll take that, Tarek. So that's a good question. So first of all, so we presented the checklist in the context here of an impact assessment on a change control. But actually, we see more use in the industry of checklists, for example, also in risk assessment of deviations or in the kappa planning stage of a process. So we can activate or configure the checklist in multiple areas of the process. And indeed, the answer there is yes, you can also use the outcome of the answered questions to drive the next part of the process. So if something has a major impact, you could then choose to have additional approvals or an additional plan in place, and both can automatically select the right next step as part of the outcome of the questions answered. Yep.
Lovely. Thank you very much for the answer. Moving on to the next question. Audience members, please do keep these questions coming in. Don't forget, you can do that by typing your question into that box there at the top left-hand corner of the screen. And don't forget to click Submit to submit the question. Next question we have, this person asks, how do you distinguish between change control and document change control? What is the difference, and what's the value of having a specific process for the document changes?
All right, I'll take that as well, Tarek. So indeed, there's two types of actions as you saw there. There is a difference between the document-centric tasks and the action tasks, so to say. We link them together because both of them will need to come together in implementing the change or in proceeding with the implementation. The separation is there so that the document-centric tasks are currently tasks that are needing to update, review documents. We can group them together so that you can do that for multiple documents at the same time. And those tasks are rounded off as part of the document review process. The other actions are more things that are actions that needed to be completed by people, by processes, by performing activities, and you're recording the result of those activities as part of that change action, and you're finalizing those as well. In the change control process, they both come together, where you could say that both the documents and the actions have to be completed before that change can be implemented or before the final approval of the change can be performed.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for the answer there. I will move on to another question here. So this one says, the idea of transforming documents into data sound like a logical step, but where would you see the boundaries? Would inspectors accept the shift to more dynamic records?
Timo, maybe I'll take that one. So I think it's a very fair question. So, and we have to consider that movement from documents into data part of a bigger theme, and that bigger theme is like also innovation and moving to a digital age. And I think that overall the regulatory bodies understand that and also the value of that. You know? But having said, of course, like inspectors are not the same. You know that. So there are some inspectors. And like if you're in a specific inspection situation, so it might be you have like more progressive inspectors or more conservative, and then it's about really proving that it's the same thing. So if you had, for example, like handed over like documents to them, so it should be easy to show and to do that very fact-based how a data set will comply, for example, to 21 CFR Part 11 or like EU GMP Annex 11, and then it should be straightforward. So it's like the same as internally, so it's more like the psychological mind shift. It's of course like with the inspectors, and we're going to help that. So we are quite present on conferences, and we are also in direct contact with agencies to educate and to on like the innovation topics to be on top of that with them, and I think that way it works well. So, and just to give an example of the specification idea, the concept of moving specification, what sounds logic, to data, of course, it means that you should be able to have a system that is able to apply like an electronic signature and to have the appropriate controls for that specification, regardless if this is now a PDF or it's a data set. That is not going to be lost. So if we talk about like the dynamics of certain elements like the checklist, so that means, okay, that makes sense because processes are dynamic, but of course it's also very much about having that things controlled and also have the appropriate audit trails and everything. So I think that shouldn't be the issue, but it needs education on all sides.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for the answer there, and thank you to everybody who submitted a question today. Unfortunately, that does bring us to the end of our time, so thank you very much to today's speakers. Thank you, Robert, and thank you, Timo, for that great presentation, demonstration as well, and of course a big thank you to Veeva Systems for sponsoring the session today. To all the attendees, you will receive an email shortly that will tell you how to access the on-demand version of the webinar.